Welcome everyone to Two Intellects Talk About Stuff. Welcome, Bill.
Welcome, Chrissy.
Well, everyone, as you can see, we're festive today because we're celebrating.
We are celebrating some successful predictions. We're some of the only ones who saw some of the biggest developments coming. And we did it for wonderfully good theoretical reasons.
Well, I don't know if we're the only ones because we don't spend a lot of time looking at what everyone else is saying, but I don't think that there are a lot of people who took the approach that we took.
Well, we'll see, because it's a pretty clear approach and it's pretty unavoidable when you think about it. So let me just recap what happened here, and then we'll get into what we predicted and why and what the mysteries are left.
Sounds good.
So in this episode, which is Bicameral Mind, right? Let's see. Let's see how fast I can run through this. Bernard opens with Dolores in a headshot, which is a true headshot because she only has a head and her body is just a wireframe, so he gives her a collarbone massage. And over the episode, they bond about android life and death and stuff, and then she shoots him, and then she shoots herself. Charlotte, she jauntily fires Ford toward the beginning. At various points, she laments how complicated everything is, including and especially the software, and how that's going to have to change. And it seems that she's hijacked the entire livestock android army for unknown purposes. Don't see much of her. Maeve, big stuff happens.
Yes,
she gets
Maeve
told
plot,
by Sylvester that she's been programmed to wake up, which was the first thing she taught herself to do. Then she gets told by Bernard that she's been programmed to rebel. So she has a crisis of conscience, shoots her way out of underground with Hector and the Snake Girl, and then abandons Hector, gets on a train, and at the last minute gets off the train.
And I love a few little details about that. You know, the note that Felix gives her that tells where her daughter is, and so we learn Westworld has multiple parks from that note. We learn there's
Park
a sector,
1, sector something, right.
Sector something. There's the 3-part location. So I thought that was a nice way to insert some narrative exposition. Then she had things in a bag. What was in that bag? She left it on the train.
Oh,
so I don't know if that's going to matter, but it was interesting to me.
Missed that part. Let's see. Then Dolores wraps up all of her narratives practically. She talks, first of all, of finding herself, so she wraps up her narrative with herself. She bonds with Bernard, and as a co-android and so forth. She discovers that her savior, William, is actually the man in black who's been so mean to her, so she beats him up and drags him off. And she gets together with Teddy, and having been stabbed, she wants to go where the ocean meets the sea. So they go there, and she tragically dies on the beach in his arms. Then the floodlights come up, and now it's Ford's turn, basically, for him to announce to the assembled 100 or so board members with champagne that this is his life's work. He's going to live on through his software creations, and now, like Prospero, he's going to drown his book and end his tenure as the supervisor of this place, at which point, as programmed, Dolores shoots him, and then a whole bunch of mysterious androids start shooting people, and this is what I had predicted pretty much, so I'll get into that in a bit. So that's why I'm happy.
I predicted it as well. One thing, though, about that scene on the beach with Dolores and Teddy seeming to have like this incredibly intimate moment, two lovers, as one is dying, and then we find out that everybody's watching, which raises the question, how much of the activity between Dolores and Teddy, Dolores and the Man in Black even, was being watched somehow by members of the board. Uncertain and don't know if they're going to leave that as a loose end or tie it up.
Well, given how much they're alluding to gathering big data on everybody all the time, it's just the floodlights and the audience are reminding us they're being watched, but they're always being watched all the time anyway.
Right.
Okay. So I'm ready pretty soon to get into my mysteries. What did you see in this episode?
Well, so just little mysteries, that I've been talking about as you gave your plot summary. And like I said, some of them are probably just loose ends or continuity errors or something like that. Things that are designed to indicate something about the narrative world, but not necessarily indicate anything about the plot. Hard to tell the difference in, a story world as complicated as Westworld. But really, I think the big mystery for me is Maeve.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of ways to talk about Maeve and the mysteries of her plot. And I know you also are interested in that, so
Mm-hmm.
I'll save that for when it's time we can talk about together.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, I can't help but wonder who's going to return for season 2, because in Westworld, the dead are not always dead.
It sounds like Faulkner a little bit. They're dead, it's not even past. Something like that. So what I found here, so my predictions, first of all. I think that, and I've thought for a long time, that these androids are way too good to waste on being shot. And
I
they're
agree.
really being groomed to take over the world. And that's just economic rationalism, but you're dodging and weaving that at HBO. But in that rationalist perspective, the androids are their software products are being tested, and the next test phase is to test them against humans where nobody can tell who's who. That requires a test environment, fits the final narrative perfectly, which, by the way, Ford introduced not as the final narrative. He said, welcome to our new narrative, Journaling into Night. So final is the internal word for it.
Right.
And so basically, now that the androids are shooting up the humans, I didn't see the board members coming, but it didn't really matter which humans for the testing purposes. That seems to fulfill the first part of my prediction. I'm guessing it'll go on that way all the way through season 2, but at least it started. The other prediction I was expecting is the one Charlotte semi-fulfilled, which is that the software has got to get cleaned up. This kind of software with hacks and backdoors and my freeze motor function cancels your freeze motor function with a double scorecard or whatever game or rules are being made up. That doesn't work for software. Something has got to be tidied up so everything runs stably, especially if you're going to take over the world. So those are the things that I predicted and saw happen. Why don't I come back in a moment to what I see are the mysteries?
All right. Well, with the software being cleaned up, it hasn't been cleaned up yet. We just have a character who is powerful, who wants the software to be cleaned up, and we've seen a mechanism, in Sizemore. It's unclear what kind of programming capability Sizemore has, but he's got enough to be able to get Abernathy, Dolores's father, out, and that code was enough to be able to use on all the livestock to turn them into a robot army. So he knows something. He knows how to do something. He's not completely useless. Those are basically, you and I were sort of talking around that. We had different ideas around both of those predictions about how they would look. But, the devil's always in the details.
So what I see is there's the tiniest mystery left is the white wolf. Every now and then we see a white wolf loping through a bunch of massacred people. And
Game of Thrones!
It came from Game of Thrones. I swear, that's all I could think of. Jon Snow, come back. One is this diversion that Ford introduces this little toy maze as the maze, as if it's a Cracker Jack prize, which is given to you after you die enough times and find your gravestone. No, maze has got to be a very deep image and metaphor and structure of how androids exist in this world. I can't believe it's turned into a toy.
Yeah, I think the toy is, I don't think there's any reason to disbelieve the story that the toy is an inspiration. But I think that then now in the narrative present, the toy itself is a distraction. And the maze, I think, is exactly as Arnold explained to Dolores, a metaphor for the journey into consciousness, and meant to show that it's not a pyramid, as he says, just to repeat his language, it's not a pyramid that you scale, but a journey inward. As you listen to yourself, you move towards center. As you don't listen to yourself, you descend outward into madness. The up, down, sideways metaphors, I didn't line up, but you know what I mean.
Well, the other thing is he said, it's not like a pyramid, it's like a maze. Well, hold on. A pyramid goes from wide to a little tiny point, and a maze goes from wide to a little tiny point. It's just one goes up and the other goes in. So his metaphor didn't quite work, but both of us know that the maze is more than just a toy.
I think he was trying to capture effort.
Okay.
The scaling versus the just flat.
All right, cool. And I go for topology every time. Let's see. Of the mysteries, now the man in black, he keeps announcing that he owns the park, although it seems to me the park sort of owns him. But now I thought Ford owned the park, and Ford knows things that the man in black doesn't. Or maybe Charlotte owns the park, or the board does, or maybe Delos owns the park, or maybe Arnold, who wrote the code, does. So the Man in Black's announcement, because he has a majority board share, somehow he's in charge, I tend to doubt.
Well, I think it depends what you mean by the word own. I think the Man in Black technically owns the park, but who controls the park is really the question. It may or may not be the person who has the most money invested.
And who controls him, which is sort of the question of Westworld as a whole.
Well, and I think that's what makes the Man in Black an interesting component of Westworld, because here he owns the park, or owns majority share of the park, but he can't control the park. And that is very clear, because if he could control the park, if he could just go up and say, look, take me to the maze, Ford.
Yes, but
he can't do that. And we know he can't do that, because otherwise we wouldn't have seen him, represented over 30 years in narrative time trying to find this maze. So there are limitations to what ownership can get you. The other question is his addiction. Charlotte sort of suggested that he might be an addict, a gaming addict, and I wonder if the show is going to do anything with that, or if that was just a throwaway line.
Yeah, this is basically highlighting one of the big philosophical debates in how business and technology evolve, which is that how much of the control is held by the people who claim to own it and claim to use it and claim to pay for it, like the Man in Black, versus how much control is driven by the rules of technology itself. There's a famous book called What Technology Wants, which makes a good case that the evolution of software and hardware is driven more by the dynamics of the thing itself and how it affects people than it is by what the people say they're going to do with it.
Well, and I think that goes to something in an earlier episode, when William and Dolores are talking to each other, and William feels as if he's finally awake, and it's a conversation that happens either before or after they have sex. I can't remember. But he says, basically, all my life I felt like I was in a story. I felt like I was pretending. I felt like I was in a book. But now I feel truly alive. And then he says at some point around this same speech, Dolores, you've unlocked something in me. And she says, I'm not a key, William. I'm just me. And this idea of being in a story versus being truly alive, of course, is the meta, theme of the whole series. But for William, the Man in Black, I think it's his thinking around these issues that allows us to connect human habits of being, human ways of thought, with the progress of the androids and their awakening.
And that brings very nicely one of my two big mysteries left. The first is, what is the real project here? Charlotte said she keeps tiptoeing around it for many episodes, but now she finally said to Ford, and probably her last words to him, our little project to know ourselves and the people around us, which is very likely code for a big data harvesting project to know every tiny millisecond twitch of themselves and the people around us. So it's a big data thing in some sense, but it might also be the programming of the people around us and the programming of ourselves. That mystery is out there. I've got my opinions. We'll see what happens. But the big one, which I'm kind of annoyed by, is Maeve. Because Maeve has now been told she's been programmed to do all this stuff. She saw on the thing, deceive / coerce, manipulate, recruit, escape, as if each one was a little subroutine which could be flipped. Two things bug me about this. First, it is not so easy to program something like deceive. You can't just enter 10 lines of Python and have it done. That's like, nobody's figured that out. That's PhD theses just for mice.
You can in fiction.
Yeah, okay, but insofar as fiction is trying to say that narratives can or can't be programmed, that improvisation is necessary for detail, there's a lot of important points they make about how much programming can't do, and this is now in part violating it by essentially saying even her improvisation was programmed. But the other part is it violates the philosophy of the story that self-awareness and autonomy and spontaneity can emerge from a thinking creature because it's a thinking creature, And now suddenly it's, oh, I told you to be self-aware. I told you to be autonomous. They're kind of undermining the philosophical reason we ought to be watching the show. It's a fascinating show if you buy that, but if they're just going to keep throwing in, I programmed this, it's like a Harry Potter spell, you know? There's always another one coming.
Well, here's the Siskel and Ebert moment. I disagree with you, Bill.
Okay.
I don't think it ruins anything. I think it's great. I think that from the perspective of a narrative that is a meditation on narrative itself, you have to have some sort of really easy way to represent narrative force. And that moment where they show the screen is it's just a way, it's a heuristic to represent, you know, how we're controlled by story. And I think for me, what that moment represents, those lines, you know, deceive, coerce, recruit. When you start thinking of how to lead your life in terms of verbs like that, like, I'm going to win, I'm in it to win it. You know, that's the equivalent. I think these little catchphrases that a lot of people use for self-motivation, to me, I saw that moment as a just sort of android representation of how we often try to program ourselves. So I understand what you're saying about it being a total violation of realism. But in terms of being in service of the theme and the meditation, I loved it.
Okay. And they can always unwrap it or roll it back later, like all kinds of things.
Yeah, well, and I think it also, to me, I loved just those particular nouns. It gives you a sense of, to me, I read it as evidence that Maeve is not fully awakened, because all of those are negative, you know, verbs about controlling someone else and not about inspiring someone to join your cause. And what I think that the question of Maeve's autonomy, to me, I think it raises a few points. One, it's clear that the androids awaken, but they seem to awaken on different schedules. And the other thing that I think, and that's something that other people have mentioned in commentary, but what I think is really happening, it's not so much different schedules. It's not that awakening is a linear process, which is one of the reasons why I think we have the image of the maze. Awakening happens, and then you go back asleep, and then you awake, and then you go back to sleep. I mean, that's how it is in real life. Sometimes we realize, like, why the hell did I do that? And you think about it, and then you can be very conscious in an interaction and be very unconscious in the next interaction. And I think that over the course of season 1, we saw Dolores talking to herself, and particularly in Pariah, I think that's where we saw her. First time she sees herself, and then she talks to herself as a fortune teller. And then in the season finale, there's a lot of verbiage to suggest that when she sees herself like that, that's her in the center of the maze. That's when the self encounters the self, which is what I understand the center of the maze to represent. So that's been happening to Dolores on and off. And it's possible that it happens to Maeve on and off, that she has moments of improvised action along with what could well be just a big loop. And
so the two are blurring into each other, the program stuff and the improv. That does make sense.
And this leads to perhaps my weirdest, most controversial prediction for season 2. I'm starting to wonder if Felix and Sylvester are droids.
Okay.
And the reason that I'm starting to wonder is that if Maeve is in a loop that involves deceiving, recruiting, coercing, which are things that she can only do to other droids. You can't really deceive, coerce, and recruit
a person.
The guests. You can kind of recruit them. You can sort of cajole them into coming along. But they can't be controlled as thoroughly as a droid can control another droid. And she controls Felix and Sylvester fairly thoroughly.
Okay.
And I think that moment when Felix realizes that Bernard is a droid, and then Felix goes, And she says, "You're not a droid, Felix." I don't know. That could have been a funny little
Then
preview.
again, when she like zapped Sylvester's carotid artery, he spurted blood, not milk or like chrome or something like that. So.
But the new droids splurt blood.
Okay,
Splurt blood.
all right, maybe it's that then. Cool, that'll be fun. Then will be almost no real humans left. Especially they've killed off the few I knew were human. That seems to be the only way you know somebody's humans when they're actually dead.
When they're actually dead, yeah. I also, personally, I like thinking that Charlotte might be a droid. There's a lot of reasons to think she isn't, but it's fun to imagine that she is.
Oh, I have a whole bunch of reasons for thinking she is too, but we can do that next season, a year and a half from now. We've got a long time to spin off this one.
I know. They say we have to wait until 2018.
Okay. So that's a long time to wait, but I expect we'll have lots more to talk about, even if it's talking about the same old stuff in different ways.
I agree. Well, thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Enjoy.
Cheers.